אל ההרצאה המרכזית של הבוקר, אני ברשותכם יעבור לאנגלית כדי להציג את הדובר המרכזי שלנו. I'm very happy and pleased to introduce Mr. Jeff Risom. Jeff Risom is a partner and the Chief of Innovation at Gehl Institute. As Chief of Innovation, Jeff is looking for the relationship between human experience and design in his very unique and holistic ways, and you will see it in a moment. Jeff will talk about making cities for people. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Risom.
Thank you. Thank you. So this works all right? Wonderful. It's a real pleasure, guys. You hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, good. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I've had the opportunity of hosting a lot of folks in Copenhagen over the last few years, thanks to Daniela and Bernard Van Leer and many others bringing people to Copenhagen. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks, Tal and Green Building Council folks to have me. It's amazing you're having ministers and important people speaking, so I hope I can keep up some of that pace. So as you can hear, I'm American, so be careful with the jokes afterwards. But I've been living and working in Denmark for about 20 years. I've got a Danish wife and Danish kids, and learned the language, really making it there, you could say. And I'm almost, I oftentimes get sort of, people ask if I'm Danish actually, because my accent is almost that good. My kids tease me constantly about my accent, but it's pretty good. And it's especially true if I'm on Zoom, because people look at me and they think we must be Danish. And so the last 3 years have been great, but then now that we're out meeting people in person, people look at me and they're like, oh, you're not Danish. I'm just below the average height of a Danish woman. So I don't pass for a Dane in that way. But the one other, great thing you might know about Danes is they're supposedly the happiest people on the planet. Have you guys heard that? So as I've lived and worked in Denmark over these years, I've become a little bit happier, I can say. And I've also learned the key to Danish happiness, which is low expectations. Low expectations, and I have to admit, people have told me Tel Aviv is amazing, and people have been saying I should come to Israel, but I didn't have the highest expectations. That's not on you, right? That's on me. But wow, I spent just yesterday biking around the city. Truly, I know Tel Aviv is just part of the country, but a truly wonderful place, really, really exciting, vibrant life, fantastic sights, and I've been really impressed. So it's really a joy to be here, and I hope I'll be back. If I do this well enough, then I will hopefully be able to come back, right? So some of the things, I see around the city, these incredible street life, so many cafes. I actually can't believe how many cafes there are in the city center. The beach, of course, is amazing. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to figure out how to get there, if you know that picture. Amazing shading and such a lush green place. Some of the public spaces are maybe need a little bit more improvement. But anyway, I won't. It's a process, right? And I know things are under construction, and that's a little bit annoying, but it's very, very exciting to see a city that's already so amazing, having so many changes take place and so many wonderful leaders that you heard earlier today speaking about the future. And it's just, I'm excited to be a little bit a part of the amazing transformation that's happening here. So what I want to talk a lot about is our client, right? So all of us working in the building sector, whether it be architects or designers, whoever, whatever our profession might be, at the end of the day, our client is people. These, slow-moving, linear, social animals. I snuck in the miles per hour just to make sure you were keeping track of the American in me. So walking at 5 kilometers an hour, right? The slow-moving, linear, social animal. That is our client. But now as we think about sustainability, as we think about a green future, we actually have to expand that notion of life to also include the rest of our environment. So at the first instance, this idea of flourishing life from a human perspective is about connections, about kindness, civility, these dignified experiences. So regardless of what walk of life you come from, you feel like the city or the neighborhood or your community actually gives you a dignified experience. It's actually quite powerful. So, and I see some of that, right? I love the little, you guys probably take it for granted, but the fact that some of your benches have the little table next to it, that's really, really kind. That allows two people to sit next to each other and share some food. I'm sure if you want to be pessimistic, it's also so that people can't sleep on the benches, right? But it's okay. In America, we'd put some spikes on the bench, right? You guys put a nice little table. That's really, really nice. So there's a kindness there in the public gestures like that. And it's also wonderful to see where private companies, right, they make their frontages very beautiful, but also I love this image of also sort of inviting, bringing some green out into the public space, sharing that generosity and kindness out into the city. So this idea of flourishing life, again, I think as we shift towards a green future, we have to understand that the city is nature, right? We are the environment. But this is one system. It's not us against them. It's all actually interconnected. And we need more tools and more ability to deal with that. But just that paradigm shift can actually make a big difference. And I see that in Tel Aviv, right? This flourishing life where, again, I was so surprised about how green it is, these beautiful trees really giving shade back to people themselves planting so many different trees and plants and bushes all over the place. And so there's a sense of that kindness and the interrelationship between flourishing life already here, and now it's a question about building more upon it. And so this is our real design challenge, right? Is to make places that invite life, all life, to flourish. And unfortunately, as designers, we tend to get this wrong quite a bit, right? Because we get a preconceived notion of what design should be, and it's about sharp angles, and we can imagine in our head how people would behave. And then when people actually do the very natural human thing of taking a shortcut or walking in a certain direction, that user experience doesn't always match our design intention. And again, unfortunately, as designers, our answer is usually to just put more people in the renderings, right? Just spice it up a little bit, pretend that people will behave in a certain way, and not thinking enough about the actual invitations that we have to create for them. So we, at least at Gehl, and the work that I do, and I think the work that more and more is happening in Israel, is about changing that a little bit, studying human behavior, being very observational about what people actually do, and then taking this knowledge and this insight to shape conditions, to create these invitations that I mentioned for life to thrive. So just very quickly about Gehl, where I'm from, I myself am an architectural engineer and social scientist, so it's a little bit about this design and science of the brain and the gut working together. And our work at Gehl has been quite global. So we've had a chance to work in many different places, large and small cities, warm and cold places, but all the time paying attention to humans and understanding what brings us together and what we share. We at Gehl have 3 offices. Like I said, I'm based in Copenhagen. We also have offices in New York and San Francisco. And our work has been also about transforming some of those places that we also call home, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So, but this entire starting point of thriving, of flourishing life, means that we have to start with life. So as we think about our design decisions, we have to be very conscientious about how do we want it to feel like on a Saturday morning? Who do we want to feel invited on a Tuesday afternoon, right? So begin with that idea of life, shape spaces around it, and then we'll get to the buildings. Like, we'll take care of them. But we can't leave to chance this idea of flourishing life in between, and we need to prioritize it. So what I want to do to take the next 27 minutes or so is to go through some of the steps of how flourishing life might be actually designed for. So we'll go through these, and I'll go bit by bit. So the first one is actually around place-changing culture. I think it's very, very obvious maybe that culture changes place, but we can't get locked in the fact that, Tel Aviv has always been like this. It can't happen here. Or my hometown has always been a certain way, right? We can actually change that. And I'll give you some examples. So already, if you've been to Copenhagen, some people have been to Copenhagen. A few hands, right? So if you've been there, you see a lot of people biking. I've been impressed on how many people are biking in Tel Aviv, but there's more in Copenhagen. And there's more from different walks of life, right? There's young kids, there's older people. It's actually quite amazing. And of course you could say, well, that's because the city's flat and all those things. But we have way worse weather than you all have here. And people bike anyway, because it's still the best, most convenient, comfortable way to get around town. There's actually a Danish expression that maybe you have it as well, that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So you just have to dress for it, right? And so if you've been to Copenhagen, it may be easy to take it for granted that it's a wonderful city, livable, bikes everywhere. But it hasn't always been like this. The culture of Copenhagen has not always been defined by bicycling. It was full of cars, traffic choked and congested, just like many other cities are. But this is a process of design changing a culture over time, actually over 60 years. So this is a map of downtown Copenhagen. It's about 2 square kilometers. It's a pretty small, compact place. But the first pedestrian street, 1962. And the idea is that over time, there's been incremental improvement, more space added. The red is pedestrian-only areas or public space improvements, right? 10 years, the network's grown up. Then we jump to 96. Now we have a lot more space. We're starting to look more at the waterfront, right? The red is coming up close to the harbor. 2005, now the waterfront's really the focus, right? More and more public space. And finally now, in the last 15 years, it's been all about the waterfront. Danes have realized that there's actually more to the city than just the streets and spaces. So this transformation, 60 years, incrementally, getting better and better over time. And as I mentioned, streets have been transformed, right? New life is beginning to be explored. But the biggest change has certainly been about water culture. Again, if you've been to Copenhagen, it's never above 28 degrees, right? Today is like the warmest day would ever be in the city. And it's rainy or cold about 300 days a year. And they have this amazing water culture now that the space is there. So many more boats, harbor bathing, people out acting like it's Tel Aviv, basically. Spending time outside, new sort of, kayak clubs and stand-up paddleboard clubs, and people are buying boats, and all these things are happening. The culture is shifting towards the waterfront. Global warming is happening, but it hasn't gotten that much warmer, right? The culture has changed. We've learned to appreciate what the city has in a totally different way and utilize it in smart little subtle ways, right? Just adding ladders essentially almost every 50 or 60 meters along the entire waterfront so people can come in and out. And even though the weather's still bad, now people can still be along the waterfront when it's raining, doing fun, creative things, given the climate that we have in Copenhagen. So one other example of this idea that we can change culture in a positive way, right? We need to keep true to our history and our authentic character. We can stay true to that. I want to make sure I'm not saying to change and forget. don't stop being Israelis. This isn't the way that the Danes haven't stopped being Danes, but they've expanded the nature of the culture, right? Another good example is in New York. Some of you have been to New York City as well? More than Copenhagen? A bit more than Copenhagen. I just got to ask. So, places like Times Square that used to actually look very different than they do today have also been transformed. And when we first started working there with Mayor Bloomberg, we made one of these early observations, right? This idea of studying what's actually going on. And so what we observed is that there was no square in Times Square, essentially. 90% of the space that they called Times Square was just road space. And when we then counted how many people were there, we saw that about 90% of the 300,000 people were squeezed into 10% of the space. So we had a very clear observation, very simple one. And Mayor Bloomberg couldn't believe that no one had ever told him that before or counted it in that way. But we had data. We had actual concrete evidence that there was no square in Times Square. And that story could be told to many different politicians, to stakeholders, and essentially, together with the fact that we knew there was a demand, we knew that we had the people there, we could begin to make a quite radical change. And so that change, again, has gone on and on. If you ask New Yorkers 12 years ago, hey, do you want more outdoor seating? No way, that's not New York culture, right? But the culture has changed. People are spending more time in outdoor locations like Times Square, like in front of Macy's here. Again, and if you ask people these questions, would you want it to change? No, but we can still make those invitations. So bit by bit, more and more public space recreated. And the basic idea is taking what's there already, right? We didn't make it look like Copenhagen. we took what the situation was. You had these traffic islands, the places you see in yellow, like at Times Square, and saying, hey, we can connect that to the building edge, extend that yellow, and then we could treat Broadway as a red carpet, roll out this red carpet for dignified, kind experiences for people, right? And then do that over and over, all over the place, over the city. So this notion of beginning with small changes, the first change to Times Square was just a 6-week pilot. It was just closing the street and putting out these cheap chairs, which again capture people's imagination, and thinking about win-win-win opportunities, right? So this whole scheme was actually also improve life for motorists. The traffic intersections, like this case of Broadway and 7th Avenue, became better through this improvement. So traffic speeds went up, congestion went down while reclaiming public space. So getting this win-win-win mentality is also part of being as inclusive as possible in the culture. So this plaza program, Times Square just being one flagship, is actually 95 plazas all over the city. 3 different mayors have done it. Bloomberg and de Blasio and now Adams have all supported this process of reclaiming public space, the same mental model of taking the traffic islands and connecting it to the adjacent street and seeing what happens, seeing new ideas coming up, much more music and festivals and life taking place in this new public space, and along the way we're measuring, how's it improving, who's it benefiting, who's spending time there, and we can begin to find out to make sure that some of these improvements aren't just for cafe latte drinking hipsters, but also for many different folks from many different New Yorkers. In Queens and Brooklyn, people of low income in particular are especially taking advantage of these public spaces. The next pillar is very much about everyday experiences. So the fact that the things that we experience every day, we might take it for granted, but they very much shape our idea of quality of life. And I think there's an emphasis on icons, right? When you think about certain cities, you think about the Statue of Liberty or iconic destinations, but it's really, we know this from work with tourism and just in general, the everyday means as much as the big icon. So we put that into perspective. This is an aquarium in Denmark. 1 million people visit it a year. It's like the 5th biggest tourist attraction. And people talk about, can we get more visitors? This is amazing. People that come, they can come see the aquarium. Do you know what else has 1 million visitors a year? Is this community center in a tiny little northern enclave of Copenhagen. 1 million people a year visit this drab, dreary place. The same amount that go to the iconic star architect drawn aquarium. Louisiana Museum, beautiful museum. Museum of Modern Art, put into the countryside in a beautiful way. 600,000 people visit there a year. 600,000 people also go to this grocery store. And who are we designing for, right? What impact can we make? If we do something like this in front of that grocery store, putting some sand in, making it easier for kids to play, now we're improving everyday life. It's not as sexy as the museum, but in terms of the number of people that have a positive, dignified experience, it's equally important. Transit stops. These are everyday places. We can choose to make them beautiful, or we can choose to make them less beautiful, right? And we've been working a lot with transit stops. Here's just an example in Copenhagen, where it's not only about making them more attractive, but also thinking about air pollution and exposure to the elements in places that people have to spend time every single day, like bus stops. Schoolyards. Schoolyards are a place that maybe you take for granted, but your kids in your community could use every day. There's a lot of these in Denmark that don't have fences around them. I know that's a tricky conversation, but there's a paradigm shift we're talking about here, right? To using schoolyards as public spaces, everyday places that people could take advantage of. Even this is a schoolyard in a part of northern Copenhagen. So I can see that this happens in Tel Aviv, right? You have these everyday life. I was super happy riding around the city yesterday, not only because of the low expectations, but also because of this amazing life that you have. And it's happening in the streets, seeing parents and children and people hanging out in these amazing places. This is probably the most beautiful streetscape I've ever seen. It blew my mind. And not only because of the architecture, but because of all the things that are happening there. So these everyday bits, we have to not take them for granted and invite for the quality of life that we want to have. There's another story here about systems. So if we think about life does not stick to our silos. It transcends, it operates across silos. And if we think about that in the city, right? Of course, we have departments. We just saw your 2 wonderful ministers today talking about how they collaborate between environment and transportation. But it's still hard, right? Because we've broken up our city streets into these different departments. But we know as citizens, as people, we experience it without those silos, right? So we have to think about that. And I'll tell you a story about how that can come in handy. So 4 years ago, the mayor of London did a very bold step. Maybe you guys have heard about this. He banned fast food advertising on public transit. Used a lot of social capital to address this really, really challenging issue of some 40 and 50% of kids are obese in the UK. So the mayor said, okay, we're going to ban fast food advertising. We were asked to come in and find out a little bit more about how this was working, and so we ended up talking to youth, talking to a lot of kids, spending time in their environment, understanding how they make their choices. And so this quote is pretty interesting, right? So talking to teenagers, they say, hey, McDonald's is the perfect place to hang out. You can chill in there, no one bothers you. You know, we get annoyed when no one gives us bad service, right? But teenagers really appreciate bad service because they just get to do whatever they want to do. And if their mom calls, they can say, don't worry, Mom, I'm at McDonald's. Okay, good, you're safe, right? So we have this situation where if we pay attention to where are the youth, where are the potentially obese children in London, well, they're at McDonald's and they're at bus stops. Bus stops is one of the few places that kids can actually hang out. It's a meeting place. It's sheltered if it's raining. So looking all over South London, we observed of 2/3 of all the teenagers that are on the street, if they're spending time, they're at a bus stop. Amazing. No other place for teenagers to be. You should think about it in your city. There's a lot of playgrounds for kids, but where are teenagers supposed to be? In London, they're at the bus stop. So now what's interesting is that almost at every bus stop, there's a McDonald's or another fast food place. So the mayor, he's a great mayor, fantastic idea, did all this work to ban fast food advertising from the bus shelter, but didn't think at all about the fact that almost every bus stop in London is next to a fast food place. Because he wasn't looking at transportation as being part of the solution to health, right? Talking only to public health people about this issue of childhood obesity. But the answer was right there if you paid attention. So who cares if there's no poster for McDonald's on the bus stop? If you get out there and you can smell the fries and your friends are hanging out, then that's going to have a way bigger impact than the advertising alone. So this idea of silos, of needing to see our entire city if we're going to create these healthy places, if we're going to think about equal access, is key. And I see some of this in Tel Aviv as well, right? You actually have, amazing overlap between public and private, where private restaurants or entities are putting a lot of, again, some of green plants and trees out into public space. And you see lush, human-scale streets that seem to be connected to, they almost feel like parks. So there is a connection here that's already happening in the city. I think in sometimes, maybe it goes a little bit in the other direction, where some of that sort of siloed thinking maybe comes up again, where new big plazas are designed only to be, say, a big plaza and not thought of as part of the wider system. But you guys can be the judge of that. So pillar 4 here, this is about social infrastructure. Have you guys heard this term, social infrastructure? Yeah? There's actually a lot of conversation about it, especially in the US, about what social infrastructure is. This is the interactive part of the session to make sure you guys are awake. Can someone say what social infrastructure is? Just shout it out. Libraries, okay? Parks? Schools? Beach, someone say? Nice, you guys are good. Streets. Shopping malls, yeah. This is where it gets a little tricky. I saw you say, ooh, shopping malls. Bike lanes, right? So this is a tricky thing. How can we define what it is without it sort of being everything? What is not social infrastructure? Sewage. And private places. Okay, so it's good. This is super interesting the discussion. I think so social infrastructure, all the things you all mentioned, these places that create connection and vibrancy and well-being, and it could be the bike lane or the beach or lots of different locations, the community center, right? These sort of the glue of our cities. I think it's also some of these co-working cafes, these street fronts that are sort of giving a window into the private work life of many young people in the city, whether that be inside or outside. I've been pretty impressed with that. Or again, some of the things that you all mentioned. I saw this little public space in front of the kindergarten, right? Just giving parents a place to meet and interact, giving them more space, maybe even to get a coffee there as they pick up their kid. Or it's also the safe street where you can actually bike to and from your school. So social infrastructure, it's the physical part that we've been talking about, but it's also about who feels invited and who's part of that social infrastructure. So we think that if we have this idea of shared urban value, a little bit more holistic in our mind, right? A little bit more about, well, who are all the other stakeholders, and can we make sure that the client's happy, but also people that don't visit that place, so the residents in a neighborhood, the developers that are paying for it, right? Having a more holistic idea about shared urban value as we think about social infrastructure. So what we've been trying to do the last couple of years is work with Stanford University, who's creating a new school of sustainability. It's the first new school at Stanford in the last 70 years. They've gotten a huge $1 billion endowment by a Silicon Valley guy, Doerr. So it's going to be the Doerr School of Sustainability. And Stanford is realizing that if we want to be a sustainable school, sustainable campus dealing with sustainability, we actually have to make sure that it's not only Stanford students that are using this place. It's not only high-end researchers that are taking advantage of this. It needs to be something that also is a benefit for the community, this idea of shared value. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand, well, who are the spaces of the Doerr School for? Yes, for the students and the faculty and academic staff, but also for the world outside the campus, the people that could use this space every single day, policymakers or experts or just regular neighbors. So if we want to truly invite for this idea of shared value, then we have to know what signals different people take from the built environment. So we've been working with this idea of photo walks, right? So asking people from different walks of life, people of color, LGBTQ community, young, old, to walk around the Stanford campus and the surroundings and essentially take images using this app. This seems like an advertisement, but it's just to explain what it is, right? This idea of how you see the city, seeing it at eye level, and capturing photos and tracing where you're walking, and then documenting if you feel welcome and invited or not. And so what we're seeing is that people are tagging certain elements, right? Like nature or atmosphere or architecture or physical comfort. And it's crazy how different this is. I'm not sure if you've hung out with someone different from you. Maybe they're different age or different ethnic background or different people. And you can look at the same thing and have a totally different impression of what you're seeing. You can see something what you think is beautiful and someone thinks it's offensive or whatever. And that's what we're starting to understand by using this app, actually, is that people are tagging ideas about well-being or comfort or atmosphere in very, very different ways depending on how they identify with themselves. So for example, folks that have identified as LGBTQ have said, hey, there's certain unwelcoming elements in the campus that actually signal to me that maybe I'm not invited. And other folks would see the same element and not have the same impression. So if we want to have this idea of shared value, we have to be aware of these signals. For example, also manicured nature, right? That's very well maintained, doesn't necessarily give people a sense of sustainability or welcomeness. So we're learning how different people interpret different points of view, so that if we can truly make this campus or environment welcoming to all, having the social infrastructure that is diverse and inclusive, we have to be aware of these things. And then we can make some principles for how to invite for that, to how to make sure that the outdoors are really inviting, to make sure the indoor spaces are really, truly inclusive. Okay, last pillar, let's say. Massive change occurs incrementally. And this has also been the theme. This is the starfish, right? One starfish at a time, or one person taking responsibility. And we can see this again and again about how small changes make a big difference. I've certainly been struck, I'll say the name wrong, this plaza here in the center. Dizengoff, I practiced. I practiced beforehand, but up here on stage, I didn't get it. So even something small like Ditzendorf Square, right, with the movable chairs and a little bit of AstroTurf, actually contributing to a bigger change. Ha-Schutter Square, I said it wrong. Ha-Schutter Square, again, a small little gesture of some movable chairs, picnic tables in a well-shaded corner. It's these type of small things that actually make a big difference. So along those lines, this is also a story of incremental change in my hometown, right? So I've lived in Copenhagen for 21 years, but I grew up in Colorado. And Denver, Colorado, has anyone been to Denver, Colorado? Oh, look at that. It's like almost as much as Copenhagen, nice. So if you've been to Denver, you maybe gone along the 16th Street Mall. This is, right? Now it basically is only used for marijuana usage, but at one point, it's still the heart, it's still downtown Denver, right? But you have this free bus shuttle that goes along the mall. It's free, and 45,000 people get on the bus every day. And from the transportation department's point of view, this is a huge success because so many people use the mall shuttle. But from the shop owners and from pretty much everyone else in the city's point of view, this is not a great place. Right? No one spends time. Businesses are failing. There's a lot of antisocial behavior. The street itself costs a lot to maintain. There's a weak retail environment. So we started working here with these different stakeholders about now 8 years ago and started just doing these experiments. Started doing some temporary changes. We started with just one Sunday where we transformed what looks like an okay street, right, into something much more lively, vibrant, and colorful. And it depended on us moving the bus off of the street. Because with all those buses going off and down the street, you can't use it as a public space. So we said, can we just try to move the bus for a day, one Sunday, when there's no baseball games and there's no concerts and all the different things we had to pay attention to. We said, yeah, okay. It was a big success. Everyone loved it. The next year, we did it 2 Sundays. People thought it was fun. We called it Meet in the Street. Business owners, everyone's happy. Until the bus operator's like, okay, kids. It's fun, all of you urbanists are having your fun with your tactical urbanism doing this stuff. But let the grown-ups come in and tell you all what it's about. We can't experiment, this is his words, right? We can't experiment with our bus riders, where one Sunday the bus is there, the next Sunday it's not, right? It's too inconsistent, we need to shut this down. And actually, he's got a point. Right? We want to make sure cities for people. It's bus riders as well. It's not only just the street as a public space. So what we did is we took him, we took the other leaders from different municipalities and actually went out there one of the days that we had the temporary activity. And we had a walk shop. And this is amazing. You guys should do this in your work because if you think about how many times decisions are being made by people who have never had that experience. So people are making decisions about bike infrastructure. They've never ridden their bike. People are making decisions about buses. They've never ridden a bus. And people have never experienced it together. So if you can get people to have a common shared experience across these silos, across disciplines, it's transformational. And that's what we did. We just had a Sunday, 3 hours on a Sunday. It's actually a good idea, too. Get the important people out on the weekend so they don't have time during the week. So get them out there on a Saturday, whatever it might be, and have a walk shop. So we took everyone around. And by the end of that 2 hours, here's the grumpy guy in the middle. He's like, you know what we need to do? Forget this every other Sunday, 2 or 3 Sundays. We need to do it all summer. 16 summers. We need to do it the entire summer, and then you're not experimenting with my stakeholders. It's like, brilliant idea. That is a great idea you had to expand our program. Right? But it was legitimate. We stopped fighting about bus riders versus pedestrians or whatever, and we just had a shared experience and figured out something together. So this 16th Street story is actually quite remarkable. Started with one day in 2014, more Sundays, 6 weekends. Then he comes in and says, this should be permanent, right? During the summer, more and more things happening. We had something called the Prototyping Festival, getting artists and local people out to put their own creations out into the public space. Bit by bit, leading up to a point where now today, we have a $150 million project to redesign the street. And if we would have started there 8 years ago, we'd still be fighting over that 150 million. We wouldn't have made any progress. But we got there bit by bit, and now people are supporting it across these different points of view. So this idea of learn by doing, not being afraid to experiment, not being afraid to just start somewhere, start making progress. It might not be perfect and it might seem small, but start moving it. It was the same in Times Square. It was the same with the public space in Copenhagen. Bit by bit, moving towards, hopefully, something where we're making places where all life can flourish. And we're being kind to one another, and we're thinking about some of these principles. So remember, I think this is not like a lecture to remember or something, right? In that way. But I think there's something here that also resonates with what we've heard so far about that paradigm shift, about paying attention to the everyday, about thinking systemically and across silos in our cities and collaboration in our government organizations. This is happening already, and hopefully this gives a little bit more inspiration to do even more of it. And thank you for taking the time to listen.